Caleb Hartley had lived most of his life on the open frontier, where the sky seemed endless and the land stretched further than the eye could see. He had grown used to waking before dawn, stepping outside his wooden cabin, and feeling the cold morning air on his face. Each day started the same way, quiet, steady, and lonely. Yet to Caleb, this was the only life he knew how to live. The wide fields, the slow wind, and the sound of cattle moving in the distance were the closest things he had to family now. Years ago, Caleb had lived a different life. He had shared warm dinners, gentle laughter, and hopeful dreams with his wife and young son. But sickness swept through their town one bitter winter, and the small family he loved more than anything slipped away before help could reach them. That loss changed Caleb forever. He stayed in the same place because moving somewhere new felt like running from memories he didn't want to forget. But he also kept his distance from people because talking about the past was too painful. So he built his days around hard work, caring for the land, raising cattle, and keeping his heart quiet. On the day everything changed, Caleb started work earlier than usual. The sky was pale, the sun still hiding behind clouds, as he saddled his old but loyal horse. Dusty, he planned to check on the cattle near the foothills because the previous night, the wind had been strong enough to shake the barn doors. A storm hadn't come, but the weather was unpredictable that time of year. Caleb wanted to be sure none of the animals had strayed too far. The ride toward the foothills was peaceful at first. The air smelled of dry grass and distant pine trees. Dusty walked at a calm pace, and Caleb kept his eyes on the fences, looking for any signs of damage. He found none. Everything seemed normal. After an hour, he stopped near a low ridge to let Dusty rest. He drank a little water from his canteen and listened to the stillness around him. It was the kind of silence only the frontier could offer, soft, deep, and endless. But then, something broke that silence. At first, it was faint, carried by the wind, a sound that didn't belong to nature. Caleb straightened, listening closely. It came again, a distant crack, sharp and quick. His first thought was that something heavy had fallen, maybe a large branch. But then another sound echoed through the hills, and this time, it was unmistakable. A horse crying out. Not the normal neigh of an animal, but a frightened, painful sound. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. He had lived too long on the frontier, not to recognize distress. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He placed the canteen back on the saddle, tightened the straps, and nudged Dusty forward. The horse responded immediately. Sensing urgency in Caleb's movements, the wind carried another noise, a short, broken shout, and Caleb leaned forward, urging Dusty to move faster. The trail became uneven as they approached a dry creek bed. The path sloped downward, making Dusty slow his steps, but Caleb kept guiding him steadily toward the sound. As they neared the bottom of the ridge, the wind shifted again, and Caleb heard breathing heavy, strained breathing from somewhere below. His heart started beating faster. He pulled Dusty to a stop at the edge of the creek bed and scanned the area. At first, he saw nothing but rocks, dry mud, and shrubs scattered along the bank. Then a small movement caught his eye. Something was lying beside a large fallen log near the bend of the creek. Caleb slid off his horse and took a few careful steps, his boots crunching softly against the ground. When he got closer, he saw it was a young man no older than 25, covered in dust and looking pale. His clothes were torn, his hands shaking as he tried to lift himself but couldn't. Caleb's breath caught in his chest. He had seen injured travelers before, but this man looked like he had been through something far worse. The stranger turned his head slightly when Caleb approached, his eyes tired and full of fear. Caleb knelt down a short distance away, unsure what to expect. The man opened his mouth, struggling to speak. His voice came out weak, barely above a whisper. "Please, just make it quick." Caleb froze. For a moment, he didn't understand. The words were soft but carried heavy meaning. The stranger wasn't asking for help. He was bracing for the worst. Caleb's heart tightened again, and he shook his head slowly. "Easy now," he murmured, trying to stay calm. "No one's here to harm you." The young man's eyes showed confusion, then a hint of relief. He drew in a shaky breath. Caleb could see he was exhausted and scared, but there was no aggression in him, no danger in his expression, just someone in need. Caleb took off his hat and wiped his forehead, thinking quickly. He didn't know who this young man was, but leaving him in the creek bed wasn't an option. The frontier could be unforgiving, especially to someone already fighting for strength. "What happened to you?" Caleb asked gently. The man swallowed hard. "Trouble. On the trail," he managed to say. "Just, please, don't let me suffer." Caleb felt a wave of emotion hit him: sympathy, worry, and something else he hadn't felt in a long time: responsibility. The frontier was filled with challenges, and life out there depended on strangers helping each other when needed. Even if this man had made mistakes, he was still a human being, alone and hurt. "You're not alone now," Caleb said softly. "I'll get you out of here." The stranger blinked as if he didn't believe it at first. Caleb stepped closer and carefully placed a hand under his shoulder. The man winced but didn't protest. Caleb guided him slowly, lifting him with patience, making sure not to cause more discomfort than necessary. It took effort, and Caleb could feel the strain in his muscles, but he didn't stop. He helped the young man toward Dusty. Dusty remained still, almost sensing the seriousness of the moment. Caleb helped the stranger climb onto the horse, supporting him until he was balanced. Then Caleb mounted behind him, keeping one arm firmly around the man to keep him steady. As they started the ride back toward the ranch, the land felt strangely quieter than before. The wind had softened, and the sky had grown heavier, as though watching their slow journey home. Caleb stayed focused, guiding the horse carefully along the easiest paths. He didn't speak much, only checking from time to time to make sure the stranger was still awake. The young man breathed slowly, each breath shaky but alive. He kept his head lowered, tired, but no longer completely hopeless. Every so often, he glanced weakly at Caleb with a look that showed a mix of gratitude and disbelief. It was as if he couldn't understand why someone would help him when he had asked for something else, something much darker. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun had begun its slow descent, painting the land in warm shades of orange and soft gold. The cabin stood quietly near the barn, the familiar sight bringing Caleb a sense of calm he hadn't felt earlier that day. He guided Dusty toward the cabin and stopped. Then he carefully helped the young man down, supporting him with both hands. The man leaned against Caleb, tired, but trusting. Caleb nodded toward the porch. "We'll get you inside. You'll be safe here." For the first time since Caleb found him, the stranger allowed himself a small, weak exhale, almost like a sigh of relief. Though Caleb didn't know his name, didn't know his story, and didn't know what trouble had brought him to that creek bed, he knew one thing clearly: his life was no longer quiet or simple. Something had begun. Something unexpected. And Caleb Hartley, a man who had lived with sorrow for years, felt the first spark of change in a long, long time. Caleb supported the young stranger carefully as they entered the small wooden cabin. The inside was warm compared to the outside air. A soft light filled the room from the single window, and the faint smell of old wood and dried herbs made the place feel calm and safe. Caleb gently lowered the stranger onto a chair near the fireplace. The man winced, breathing heavily, trying to stay upright. Caleb moved around quietly, gathering water, a clean cloth, and a small box of simple supplies. He wasn't a trained healer, but life on the frontier had taught him enough to manage small wounds and help someone through difficult moments. He placed everything on a small table beside the chair, then crouched in front of the young man. "I need to know your name," Caleb said softly, trying not to push too hard. The stranger swallowed, his throat dry. "Jesse," he whispered. "Jesse Tate." Caleb nodded. "All right, Jesse. I'm Caleb Hartley. You're safe here. Let me help you." Jesse's eyes softened for a moment. He looked exhausted, as if the simple act of saying his own name took effort. Caleb dipped the cloth in water and began gently cleaning the dirt from Jesse's arms and face. Jesse didn't protest, but his face tightened slightly each time Caleb touched a tender spot. Still, there was no anger or fear in his eyes toward Caleb. only a deep tiredness. Caleb worked slowly, allowing Jesse to rest in between. He handed Jesse a small cup of water. Jesse took it with shaking hands and sipped carefully, as if even drinking required focus. After a few moments, Caleb pulled over a small stool and sat beside him. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with warmth. "Jesse," Caleb said quietly, "I came upon you in that creek bed. You looked like you needed help. You kept saying something about wanting everything to be quick. Why were you alone out there?" Jesse closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, they were full of struggle, not physical pain alone, but emotional weight too. He leaned back, trying to gather the strength to talk. "I didn't know where else to go," Jesse said slowly. "I was on the trail for days, trying to get away, trying to start fresh somewhere." Caleb didn't interrupt. He saw the way Jesse's voice trembled, as if the story wasn't easy for him to share. "I used to work with a group of men," Jesse continued. "I thought I could trust them. They weren't always good people, but I told myself I'd only stay long enough to earn a little money. Then I'd leave, build a new life somewhere far away." Jesse breathed in deeply, as though each memory weighed him down. His words remained gentle, never describing anything dangerous in detail, only the emotions tied to it. "But it didn't go the way I planned," Jesse said. "I wanted to stop being part of things I didn't agree with. I told them I wanted out. They didn't like that. They tried to keep me from leaving." Caleb watched him quietly, his expression calm and understanding. "I thought I could just walk away," Jesse said with a weak shake of his head. "But the world doesn't work like that sometimes. Some people believe once you're with them, you shouldn't ever walk away. That's why I ended up alone out there. I had been running for days, barely eating, barely sleeping. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going." Jesse paused, his breathing uneven. Caleb handed him more water, which he accepted gratefully. "You must have been frightened," Caleb said gently. Jesse nodded, his eyes reflecting honesty rather than shame. "I was. And when I fell down in that creek bed, I thought that was it. I didn't see any help coming. I didn't see any reason to keep trying. That's why I said what I said. I just didn't want to keep struggling with no hope left." Caleb took in Jesse's words slowly. He could feel the truth in them, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the feeling of having nowhere to turn. Caleb knew all too well what it felt like to lose hope. He had lived years moving through life with nothing but memories to keep him going. That understanding softened his voice when he spoke again. "You're not alone anymore, Jesse," Caleb said. "You're here now, and I won't let anything happen to you." Jesse looked up at him, a mixture of relief and disbelief in his eyes. "Why?" he whispered. "You don't even know me." Caleb took a slow breath. He didn't know Jesse's whole story, and he didn't need every detail to understand that he was simply a person in need. Caleb had spent so many years trying to avoid the world, trying to keep his heart quiet, but the moment he had lifted Jesse out of the creek bed, something had shifted inside him, something he didn't fully understand yet. "Sometimes," Caleb said, "a person doesn't need to earn help, they just need it. And someone else has the strength to give it." Jesse's eyes softened again, this time with gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." Caleb stood up, walked to the stove, and began warming some broth. The cabin filled with the gentle smell of herbs. Jesse watched him, his expression thoughtful. "You live here alone?" Jesse asked after a moment. "Yes," Caleb replied. "Been that way a long time." Jesse nodded slowly, as if he understood the quiet sadness behind those words. He didn't press for details. Instead, he let the silence rest between them, a peaceful silence filled only by the crackling fire. Caleb returned with a bowl of warm broth and handed it to Jesse. "Take it slow," he said. "It'll give you a bit of strength." Jesse ate carefully, spoon by spoon. With each sip, some color returned to his face. After he finished, Caleb helped him to the small cot in the corner. Jesse lay down gently, closing his eyes as if the simple act of lying on a soft surface was a gift he hadn't expected. Caleb pulled a blanket over him and stepped back, watching him rest. For a moment, he saw not an exhausted traveler, not a man running from his past, but someone who needed a chance to breathe again. As night settled over the ranch, Caleb lit a lantern and checked the doors and windows as he always did. But tonight felt different. The quiet of the cabin was no longer just another evening alone, it held new meaning. Jesse stirred slightly on the cot, turning onto his side. "Caleb?" he said weakly. "Right here," Caleb answered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Caleb's eyes softened. "You're safe. Sleep now." Jesse drifted into rest, his breathing calm and steady. Caleb stood by the window, looking out into the dark land stretching beyond the ranch. Stars shimmered above the horizon. The world felt wide and still, but for the first time in a long while, Caleb didn't feel small inside it. He felt needed. He felt responsible. And though he didn't know what challenges might come because of Jesse's story, he also knew he wouldn't turn away. Helping Jesse wasn't a burden. It was a calling Caleb hadn't realized he'd been waiting for. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him long asleep began to wake. The night grew darker, the cabin quieter, and Caleb whispered to himself, almost as if speaking to the world beyond the window, "Whatever comes next, we'll face it." The next morning, Caleb woke early, just as he always did. But this time, when he stepped out of his room, he didn't hear the usual silence of the cabin. Instead, he heard slow breathing from the corner where Jesse slept. It reminded him that he was no longer alone. It was strange, but comforting too. For years, Caleb had not shared his space with anyone, and now there was a young man resting under his roof, trusting him for safety. Caleb walked quietly to check on Jesse. The blanket had slipped off his shoulder, so Caleb gently pulled it back up. Jesse's face looked calmer than the day before. There was still tiredness in his expression, but also relief, as if he finally felt he had a place to rest without fear. Caleb heated some water and prepared a simple morning meal. The warmth from the stove filled the room, mixing with the soft morning light entering through the window. After some time, Jesse opened his eyes. He blinked slowly, adjusting to the light. "Morning," Caleb said in a calm tone. Jesse gave a faint smile. "Morning." "Caleb, how are you feeling today?" Caleb asked. Jesse took a moment to think. "Better," he said softly. "I can breathe easier. My legs still feel weak, but I'm not as tired as yesterday." "That's good," Caleb nodded. "You need rest. You've been through a lot." Jesse looked down, his fingers twisting slightly as if he was nervous. "I didn't mean for all this trouble," he whispered. "You haven't caused trouble," Caleb replied. "You just needed help. Anyone would have done the same." Jesse lifted his eyes again. "No, not everyone." He paused. "Some people walk past a person in need. Some don't want to get involved." Caleb didn't argue. He knew Jesse wasn't wrong. Life on the frontier taught people to mind their own business, but Caleb had lived long enough to know that sometimes a person needed to step forward instead of stepping away. While Jesse rested, Caleb went outside to check on Dusty and the cattle. The morning air was cool, and thin clouds moved slowly across the sky. Everything seemed peaceful at first, but Caleb had a strange feeling inside, something he couldn't quite explain. A quiet tension, almost like the calm before a storm. Even though the sky was clear, he didn't want to worry Jesse, so he finished his chores and went back inside. Jesse had managed to sit up on the cot. He looked stronger, but still fragile. Caleb helped him to the table, where they shared a warm meal in silence for a moment. Then Jesse spoke softly. "Caleb, I need to tell you something." Caleb placed his spoon down and looked at him, patiently waiting. Jesse took a slow breath. "The people I used to work with, they don't like when someone leaves. They believe once you're with them, you should stay forever." His voice dropped. "They might try to find me." Caleb listened carefully. Jesse wasn't saying anything harmful, only giving honest truth. Caleb appreciated that Jesse trusted him enough to share this. "Do you think they know where you came from?" Caleb asked calmly. "I don't know," Jesse answered. I tried to lose the trail. I thought I did, but I couldn't keep going. I was too tired. Caleb nodded slowly. He didn't want Jesse to feel guilty or scared. You're safe here, he said. This ranch is far from town. People rarely come this way. Jesse seemed a little comforted by that, but there was still a shadow of worry in his eyes. The day passed quietly. Jesse rested, and Caleb worked near the cabin to stay close. He chopped some wood, fixed a few fence posts, and cleaned the water trough. Every now and then, he checked on Jesse through the window. Jesse would either be sleeping or watching the open land with thoughtful eyes. By afternoon, Jesse felt strong enough to walk outside with Caleb's support. They stepped out onto the porch, and Jesse breathed in the fresh air deeply, like he hadn't had a peaceful breath in days. It's beautiful here, Jesse said softly as he looked at the wide fields. It's home, Caleb replied. Jesse leaned on the railing, watching the land. For a moment, he seemed lighter, like the weight he carried had loosened just a little. But then Caleb noticed something. Jesse's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked past the barn, toward the far end of the land. What's wrong? Caleb asked. Jesse focused, squinting at the distance. Do you see that? He whispered. Caleb followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just dusty land, brush, and the faint shine of sun on dry soil. Then he noticed a shape. Far away, near the edge of the property line, a figure moved. It was too distant to make out clearly. But it wasn't one of Caleb's cattle. Caleb's heart tightened just a little. But he kept his face calm. Could be someone passing through, he said gently. Jesse didn't look convinced. They don't just pass through places like this, he murmured. Caleb put a hand on Jesse's shoulder. Let's not jump to conclusions, he said. Come inside. You need rest. Quote, Jesse hesitated but finally nodded. They returned to the cabin, and Caleb helped him back to the cot. Jesse lay down slowly, but his eyes kept drifting toward the window. Caleb didn't want Jesse to worry, so he stayed close to the cabin that afternoon. He walked around the property a few times, scanning the distance, but didn't see anyone else. Still, that uneasy feeling didn't leave him. As evening approached, the air grew cooler. Caleb prepared dinner while Jesse rested. The warm light of the oil lamp filled the cabin, and for a little while, things felt normal again. But just as they began eating, something outside broke the quietness of the evening. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Jesse sit up straight. It was the soft sound of hooves. Caleb and Jesse exchanged a glance. Caleb moved slowly to the window and looked out, careful not to show himself fully. The sky had darkened, but the moon was bright enough to show shapes in the distance. There were horses, more than one, moving steadily toward the ranch. Jesse's breath caught. His voice came out barely audible. They found me. Caleb stayed calm. He didn't panic or make sudden movements. He turned away from the window and walked toward Jesse. Listen to me, Caleb said firmly but gently. No one is going to harm you here. Jesse's hands trembled. Caleb, you don't understand. They'll come looking inside. They won't just leave if they think I'm here. Caleb thought for a moment, then made a decision. You're too weak to travel, he said. But I can keep you hidden. There's a small cellar under the cabin floor. It used to store grain long ago. No one knows it's there. Jesse's eyes widened with surprise. You'd hide me? Yes, Caleb said firmly. I told you you're safe with me. Jesse looked emotional for a moment, almost as if he didn't know how to handle someone caring about him this much. Caleb helped Jesse slowly off the cot. Jesse leaned on him as Caleb guided him to a small, square wooden panel near the back wall. He pulled it open, and cool air rose from below. The cellar wasn't large, but it was hidden well and dry. You'll be all right here, Caleb said. I'll bring you water and check often. Jesse nodded, trusting him completely. Caleb, I'm sorry this trouble came to your door. Don't be, Caleb replied. Some things are worth standing for. Jesse climbed down into the cellar carefully. Caleb lowered a lantern so he could see. Jesse settled against the wall, breathing softly. Before closing the panel, Caleb said, "Stay quiet. I'll handle everything." Jesse gave a small nod, but his eyes were full of worry for Caleb. Caleb closed the panel and took a deep breath. Then he stood quietly, listening to the sound of hooves coming closer outside. He wasn't a man who looked for trouble. He had lived most of his life in peace, but helping Jesse felt right. And Caleb Hartley wasn't the kind of person who turned away when someone needed him. The sound outside grew closer, and Caleb knew the moment he had feared was finally at his doorstep. But he also knew one thing clearly. He would face it with steady courage, no matter what came next. Caleb stood in the center of the cabin, listening to the slow, steady sound of hooves approaching the ranch. The gentle rhythm echoed through the quiet evening air, growing clearer and clearer. The lantern on the table flickered slightly, casting soft shadows on the wooden walls. Everything around him felt still, as if the entire world had paused to watch what would happen next. He looked once more at the wooden floor panel under which Jesse was hidden. The cellar was small but safe, and Caleb knew Jesse needed a quiet place where he could rest without fear. Caleb took a deep breath, steadying himself. He wasn't a man used to confrontation, and he certainly had no desire for trouble. All he wanted was to protect his land, his peace, and now the young man who trusted him. Outside, the hooves came to a stop. The silence that followed felt heavy. Caleb walked to the door slowly and opened it just enough to step outside onto the wooden porch. Evening light washed over the open fields, and in that dim glow, he finally saw the visitors clearly. 3 riders sat on their horses near the edge of the yard. Their clothes were dusty from travel, and their expressions were unreadable from a distance. They weren't shouting, nor were they rushing forward. They simply sat there, watching the cabin as if waiting for something. Caleb kept his posture calm. He lifted a hand in greeting. "Evening," he said politely, his voice steady. The riders didn't move for a moment. Then one of them nudged his horse forward a few steps. "Evening," the man replied. His tone was neutral, neither friendly nor threatening. "We're looking for someone." Caleb felt that familiar tightness in his chest, but he didn't let it show. "Most folks take the road north if they're searching for someone," he said. "Not much out this way except land and cattle." The man nodded slowly. "We know. But someone told us they saw a traveler come this direction. A young fellow. Looked tired. Could have been hurt. You see anyone like that?" Caleb kept his expression unchanged. "I've been working on my ranch all day. Haven't seen a traveler." It wasn't a lie in Caleb's mind. Jesse wasn't just a stranger passing through. He was someone who needed shelter. Someone who needed kindness. Caleb had helped him, because that was simply the right thing to do. The rider studied him for a few seconds. The other 2 waited behind him quietly. Caleb could feel the tension in the air, but he didn't let his nerves reach his face. He had lived years alone, with his thoughts. Silence didn't scare him. "You sure?" the rider asked again. "He's someone we're mighty concerned about." "Concern," Caleb repeated calmly. "That's a good reason to look for someone. But I can't help you. Haven't seen anyone." The riders exchanged a glance. The lead rider nodded lightly, accepting Caleb's words even though he didn't look fully convinced. "Well," the man said, "if you do see someone, send word to the town. Folks there would want to know he's all right." Caleb nodded. "Of course." The rider pulled the reins gently, turning his horse away. The other 2 followed. The group moved slowly at first, then picked up speed, heading toward the open trail that led back to the main road. Within moments, the sound of hooves faded into the distance. Caleb remained standing on the porch until the riders disappeared completely. Only when the land fell silent again did he let out a deep breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His shoulders relaxed, and he closed his eyes briefly. Letting the relief settle through him, he stepped back inside the cabin and closed the door quietly behind him. The lantern flame danced gently, welcoming him back into the warm, safe interior. "It's all right now," Caleb said softly. He knelt down and lifted the wooden panel. Jesse was sitting up in the cellar, his breathing shallow, his eyes anxious. "Are they gone?" he asked in a hushed voice. "Yes," Caleb said with a small, reassuring smile. "They're gone." Jesse climbed up slowly, and Caleb helped him stand. Jesse still looked shaken. But there was a new expression on his face too, something like admiration, mixed with gratitude that ran deep. "You didn't have to protect me," Jesse said quietly. "They would have left if you handed me over. You could have avoided all this." Caleb shook his head. "I wasn't raised to turn away from someone who needs help. You're safe here, Jesse. That's all that matters." Jesse blinked rapidly, as if holding back emotions he didn't know how to express. "I don't understand why you're doing all this. I'm just someone who made mistakes." Caleb placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." Jesse lowered his eyes, thinking about Caleb's words. "I want to do better," he whispered. "I want a fresh start. I don't want to go back to the life I was living before. I'm grateful you gave me a chance." Caleb nodded. "And I believe you can find that new beginning. But you can't stay here forever. You need a community. A place where you can work, learn, and live with purpose." Jesse understood. He wasn't being pushed away, he was being guided forward. That night, after they finished a simple meal, Jesse sat quietly near the fire. His face looked thoughtful but calmer than before. He watched the flames gently sway, their warm glow reflecting in his eyes. "Caleb," Jesse said softly, "when I feel strong enough, I'm going to the nearest town. I'll speak to the right people. I'll tell them everything honestly. I want to build a better life, and I want to do it the right way." Caleb felt something warm inside his chest. Pride. Jesse wasn't running anymore. He was choosing a path forward with courage. Caleb nodded approvingly. "That's good. You'll be all right." Jesse looked up and gave a small, sincere smile. "I hope so. And thank you. Truly. You didn't just help me survive. You helped me remember that there are good people in this world." Caleb felt his throat tighten slightly. He had lived so long with grief and solitude that he'd forgotten how important genuine connection could be. Helping Jesse brought something back into his life, a sense of purpose he thought he had lost forever. The next morning, the sun rose gently, casting a golden glow across the fields. Jesse stepped outside with Caleb's support and breathed in the fresh air. He looked healthier, stronger, and more determined. After a few days of rest, Jesse felt ready. He packed the small belongings he had, and Caleb gave him extra food for the road. Caleb also lent him a gentle horse from the ranch, a calm, trustworthy animal that would carry Jesse safely. Jesse stood in front of Caleb before leaving, unsure how to express his gratitude. "I don't know how to repay you," he said softly. "But I promise, I'll make you proud." "You already have," Caleb replied with a gentle smile. Jesse mounted the horse slowly, still a bit weak but steady enough to travel. He looked at Caleb one last time. "I'll never forget what you did for me." "Stare," Caleb nodded. "Just take care of yourself. And remember, your future is yours to shape." Jesse turned the horse toward the road leading to town. The morning sun painted the horizon in warm colors as he rode forward, leaving behind fear and stepping into hope. Caleb watched him go, his heart quiet but full. When Jesse disappeared into the distance, Caleb stood for a long moment, letting the peaceful silence settle around him. The ranch felt different now, not emptier, but fuller somehow, as if kindness had echoed through the land. Caleb walked back inside the cabin. The world outside stretched wide and calm, but inside him, something had changed. Helping Jesse didn't just save a young man, it revived a part of Caleb he thought was gone. And as he sat by the fire, Caleb Hartley realized that life on the frontier still had room for unexpected stories, new beginnings, and second chances for both Jesse and himself.